I've always loved the quiet. That's the real reason I camp alone and hike alone. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about the silence. The kind of silence that presses against you like a weight, smoothing out the chaos of everyday life. Out here, far from deadlines and blaring traffic, I can hear my own thoughts. But it's a fragile thing, the peace that the wilderness offers. I've learned that the quiet can also play tricks on you, turn on you. That's what happened to me in the San Juan National Forest. I'd been camping alone plenty of times before, but this trip was different. I still have trouble putting it into words. All I know is that the silence stopped being my friend somewhere on the second day. I'd planned to be out there for 4 days, just long enough to clear my head and reset. The spot I'd picked was remote, a stretch of dense forest near Pagosa Springs that even the locals didn't visit often. It was perfect, or so I thought. The first day went like it always does. The drive up was uneventful, and after a few hours of hiking I found the perfect campsite. It was tucked away by a creek, surrounded by towering pines, with a small clearing just big enough for my tent and fire pit. I felt that familiar rush of excitement as I set up camp, the freedom of being out here completely alone, with nothing but wilderness around me. That first night was easy. I sat by the fire, listening to the water rush over the rocks in the creek. I wrote in my journal a bit, mostly just notes about the hike and some thoughts about work. Then I crawled into my tent, ready to sleep. The silence was comforting at first, as it always is, but I woke up in the middle of the night to something strange. It was subtle, just a faint whispering sound, like the wind picking up through the trees. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day, things started to go wrong. I woke up later than I'd planned, the sky already a pale blue overhead. My stove was acting up, which was weird because it had worked fine the night before. It just wouldn't light, no matter what I tried. I ended up eating cold granola and packing up my camp, ready to move deeper into the forest. That's when I noticed my GPS wasn't working. I'd had reception when I camped here before, but now my phone was useless. No signal at all. I wasn't worried yet, though. I'd brought a map, and I knew the area well enough to navigate without technology. Still, the feeling that something wasn't right settled in, and I couldn't shake it. The hike was harder than I expected. My legs felt heavier, as if the air itself was weighing me down, and the forest was quiet, too quiet. Normally you'd hear birds or the occasional rustle of squirrels in the underbrush, but today, everything was still. The silence felt unnatural. By late afternoon, I found another campsite a little deeper into the woods, next to a meadow that looked untouched. I set up my tent quickly, eager to get a fire going. But as I worked, the feeling of being watched crept up on me. I couldn't shake it. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, nothing was there. Just trees and shadows, but the sensation wouldn't leave. That night I heard the whispers again. This time they were louder, clearer, and they weren't random. They were saying something, my name. I sat up in my tent, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable, drifting on the breeze from somewhere just beyond the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent and shone the beam into the trees. Nothing. The forest was still, the fire flickering in the corner of my vision. I stood there for a long time, listening, but the whispering had stopped. It was just the wind, it had to be. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the third day, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept much the night before, and the unease had only grown stronger. My gear wasn't cooperating either. When I tried to pack up my tent, I found that the poles had bent. They were new, barely used, but somehow they were warped, like something had twisted them while I slept. It didn't make sense. The whispering was back too, even during the day. It followed me as I hiked, a faint sound at the edge of my hearing, like someone walking just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was the wind, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't alone out here. Then there was the whistling. It started around midday, just after I'd set up my third camp. At first I thought it was a bird, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. It came from somewhere deep in the woods, a high, clear note that echoed through the trees. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I called out, hoping it was another hiker, someone who had stumbled across my camp, but there was no response, just silence. I tried to stay calm, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Now it felt like something was circling me, just beyond my vision, waiting. That night, the whispers didn't stop. I lay in my tent, wide awake, listening as the sound of my name drifted through the trees. It was faint at first, like it had been the night before, but as the hours passed, it grew louder, more insistent. Dylan. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The fire had died down, casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. I scanned the trees, heart racing, but there was nothing, just darkness. I was about to crawl back into my tent when I saw something move, a shadow slipping between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was too big to be an animal, and it was moving too deliberately, like it was watching me, waiting. I turned off my flashlight and backed into the tent, my mind racing. I had never been this scared in the woods before, not once in all the years I'd camped alone. But now, there was something out there. I could feel it. I zipped the tent shut and tried to steady my breathing, but the whispers were inside my head now. They weren't just outside, they were all around me. Dylan, Dylan. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tent, clutching the flashlight, listening as the whispers circled me. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes it was several, but it was always the same, soft, insistent, calling my name. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get out of these woods. But as I started hiking, the whistling began again. This time it was closer, following me as if something were walking just behind me, whistling a slow, eerie tune. I didn't stop to look. I didn't want to see whatever it was. I just kept walking, faster and faster, until I was practically running down the trail. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and slowly turned around. There, standing just at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, and its lips curled into a grin. It stood there, staring at me, its head cocked to the side as if amused. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whistling had stopped, and now there was only silence. A silence so thick it pressed down on me like a weight. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually I turned and ran. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead where my car was parked. When I finally looked back, the figure was gone. I never told anyone what happened in the San Juan National Forest, not really. I tried to explain it to myself 1,000 different ways. Exhaustion, anxiety, maybe even altitude sickness. But none of that explains the whispers, or the whistling, or the figure that watched me from the trees. I haven't been camping since. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed, complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine and stepped outside. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like the spot where I might finally find it. I grabbed my gear and set up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine. Gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night in the wilderness. As I moved through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I wandered deeper into the forest, gathering wood, I found more of them. Carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to dwell on strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped, the trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning, endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased, like someone who had spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of Adirondacks, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right, and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it." He turned, starting back down the trail. "Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse pounded, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from Ada, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Watcher was still out there. Somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as though the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I had heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps, one that locals said disappeared and reappeared as though it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it and film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera and set it up, filming a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on the damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in symbols, strange spiraling shapes that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving, the trees closing in tighter. The trail I was following grew fainter, more overgrown, until it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping my camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path, and now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. The mist curled around the trees, thick and almost suffocating. But I was certain I'd been on the right trail. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed that I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, standing alone in the fog. "Okay," I muttered. "You've dealt with worse." I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. A growing unease settled in my chest. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze, listening. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate steps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. Something was off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it. Watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look," I said, pulling out my GPS. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get him some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago was now choked with brambles. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees, thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate!" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Eli nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us. The forest." I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around as though he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the whispers growing louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me, the fog so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail, and the strange, shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal. The mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me, but deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me. And I had a feeling it was waiting, somewhere in the mist, for me to return. I wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Not in this forest, not sitting in this RV, staring at the tall trees outside, wondering if this trip would be my last. Ford Pinot National Forest had been Karen's idea, years ago. She had this way of looking at the world, seeing the beauty in everything. She wanted to camp here, hike the trails, and soak in the stillness of the ancient trees. I didn't get it then. Too caught up in work, too busy to care. But now, it was all I had left. It had been a year since she died, and I still couldn't make sense of it. A car accident on a quiet street. Just like that, she was gone. And I was left stumbling through life, trying to figure out how to exist without her. This trip was my last attempt at finding something, anything that made sense. So here I was, parked deep in the middle of nowhere, hoping the forest would somehow offer answers. I didn't know what else to do. The trees stretched up into the sky, their thick trunks casting shadows that lingered even in the daylight. It was beautiful in a way, but it felt empty without her. I could almost hear her voice telling me to look at the wildflowers or marvel at the way the sunlight filtered through the branches. I stepped out of the RV. The cool, damp air wrapped around me. The scent of pine and moss was thick, earthy. Everything seemed so alive, and yet all I could feel was the weight of the past pressing down on me. I started a small fire just like I'd done the past few nights, and sat there watching the flames dance. The crackling wood was the only sound in the stillness. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, barely audible over the fire, but distinct enough to make me stand up, heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. Just shadows. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe some other animal, but the feeling stuck, the sense that someone was watching me. I wasn't alone. I sat back down, trying to shake the unease, but it lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about the old man I'd met the day before, Edgar. He'd been wandering the campground when I arrived, his wrinkled face covered in a scruffy beard, eyes sharp despite his age. He was friendly enough, but there had been something off about him. "You came at the wrong time," he had said, staring at me with a knowing look. "Why is that?" I had asked, brushing it off. Some things shouldn't be disturbed, especially at night. The forest, it has its secrets. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't respond. But his words stuck with me, replaying in my mind as I sat by the fire. What did he mean by secrets? What was he talking about? I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, sitting in the dark with the fire flickering low, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to what he had said. The wind picked up, making the trees sway, their branches creaking overhead. The fire sputtered as the breeze caught it, and I stood up again, feeling restless. I needed to move, to walk, anything to clear my head. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the forest, just far enough to feel like I was doing something. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trunks of the trees but casting long shadows everywhere else. My footsteps were the only sound now, crunching softly on the forest floor. I don't know how far I walked before I saw the first symbol. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a spiral-like shape that looked old, weathered by time. I crouched down, running my fingers over it. It was smooth, unnaturally so, like it had been carved recently. I stood up, shining the light around, and spotted more symbols carved into the trees at odd intervals. Spirals, faces, shapes that made no sense. They all seemed to be pointing deeper into the forest, like a trail leading me somewhere. A chill ran down my spine. I turned back, trying to ignore the nagging curiosity that pulled at me. I wasn't here to chase after strange carvings. I was here to... well, I didn't know why I was here anymore, but this wasn't it. As I made my way back toward the RV, the air seemed heavier, colder. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, and the shadows seemed darker. The feeling that I was being watched returned, stronger this time, like someone or something was following me. My pulse quickened, and I picked up the pace, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Nothing, just trees and shadows. When I reached the RV, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The fire had gone out, leaving nothing but smoldering embers. I climbed inside, locked the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart still racing. I was just tired. That's all it was. The grief, the isolation, it was messing with my head. I hadn't been sleeping well, and the loneliness had a way of playing tricks on the mind. At least that's what I told myself. The next morning, I met Leah. She was hiking near the campground, a pack slung over her shoulders, looking every bit the confident outdoorswoman. She was friendly, outgoing, and struck up a conversation with me as soon as we crossed paths. "You camping out here alone?" she asked, her voice light and casual. I nodded. "Yeah, needed some time away, I guess." "I get that," she said, smiling. "This place is something else. It's beautiful, but it can get a little weird at night, don't you think?" I paused, remembering the footsteps, the carvings, and Edgar's warnings. "Weird?" I asked. "How strange it can feel out here after dark. Just stories, old legends. You know how it is with places like this. Every forest has its ghost stories." I tried to keep my tone neutral, but the unease from the night before still lingered. She smiled again, but this time there was something in her eyes, like she knew more than she was letting on. "Just be careful. It's easy to get lost out here," she said. With that, she waved and continued down the trail, disappearing into the trees. I watched her go, wondering if I should have said more, asked her what she meant, but I didn't. I spent the rest of the day at camp, trying to relax, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. That night, as I sat by the fire again, I couldn't stop thinking about the symbols. They'd seemed so deliberate, so purposeful, like someone or something was trying to lead me deeper into the woods. And then the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder, closer. I stood up, shining my flashlight toward the trees, but saw nothing, just shadows. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the RV, slow, deliberate, crunching on the forest floor. My throat tightened as I strained to listen, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, but the footsteps didn't answer. Instead, they stopped. Dead silence. I backed toward the RV, fumbling for the door when I saw it. Movement, just at the edge of the trees, a figure tall, thin, barely visible in the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me, my breath coming in short gasps. What the hell is happening? I sat there for hours staring at the door, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The next morning, Leah was gone. Her tent was still there, her pack sitting neatly outside, but she was nowhere to be found. I searched the area, calling her name, but the forest was silent. It didn't make sense. People didn't just vanish like that, not without a trace. I thought about Edgar, about the stories he'd told, the forgotten one he'd called it. A legend about a man who'd wandered too far into the forest, losing himself until he became part of the land itself. Now, they said he lured others to join him, preying on their grief, their loneliness, until they disappeared too. I didn't believe it. I couldn't. But Leah was gone, and the symbols were still there, etched into the trees like a warning or an invitation. The footsteps returned that night, and this time, I knew what they wanted. I could hear her voice, Karen's voice, calling to me from the trees. Soft, loving, like she was right there waiting for me. "Letitia," she whispered, "come find me." My heart ached, torn between the impossible and the undeniable. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it, but I wanted to believe it was. I stepped outside, the cold air bit at my skin. The forest was dark, silent, but the voice was there, guiding me. I walked toward the trees, my feet moving on their own, drawn by the sound of her voice. "Letitia," she called again, "don't leave me." I stopped at the edge of the woods, staring into the darkness. I could see her now, just beyond the first row of trees, her face, her smile. She was there, waiting for me, but something was wrong. The shadows around her shifted, twisting like they were alive. Her eyes, once warm and familiar, were hollow, empty. I took a step back, the spell breaking. This wasn't Karen. I turned and ran back to the RV, back to safety. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing in as the voice grew louder, angrier. "Letitia!" I slammed the door behind me, heart pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. I could still hear her screaming my name from the trees, but I didn't go back. I couldn't. I left Ford Pinot the next morning, the RV's engine sputtering to life as I drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The forest had its secrets. I wasn't meant to know them. And whatever it was out there, whatever the forgotten one truly was, it would stay there, waiting for someone else. It was still dark when I arrived at Anthony. The silhouette of the monolith rose above the horizon like a jagged alien structure. The first light of dawn barely touched the sky, but the outline was unmistakable. This place had always felt otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to the same earth the rest of us walked on. I parked the RV in the farthest corner of the campground, away from the few other visitors scattered throughout the park. I wanted isolation. Needed it. Actually, after months of losing myself in work and failing to fix my crumbling marriage, I thought this trip might offer me some clarity. If nothing else, I had my research to keep me focused. Legends of Anthony had fascinated me for years, but one in particular always stuck out: the legend of the Watcher. Native tribes in the region spoke of a spirit that guarded the tower, a being that offered ancient knowledge to those who sought it, but demanded a steep price in return. As a history professor obsessed with ancient folklore, I couldn't resist the lure of that story. I had come to Wyoming to dig deeper into those legends, hoping to uncover something, anything, that might be hiding in the shadows of the tower. I stepped out of the RV, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. The towering spires of pine trees loomed around me, creating an unsettling sense of isolation. I unpacked my gear, set up camp, and grabbed my notebook. The plan was simple: hike around the base of the tower, take some notes, and maybe, just maybe, find something that would finally make all the pieces click. As I set out toward the trail that led to the tower, I passed an older man in a park ranger uniform, grizzled with deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, though, alert in a way that made me feel like he saw more than the average person. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning," I replied, glancing briefly at his name tag. "Tom, you here for the sights or something else?" His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. I hesitated. "Research, mostly. I'm looking into some of the old Native American stories about the tower." He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking toward Anthony. The Watcher, huh? I stopped. I hadn't mentioned that specific legend. He chuckled softly. Everyone comes looking for something. But you do well to leave the Watcher alone, son. Some things don't like being disturbed. I tried to brush off his warning with a nervous laugh. You don't really believe that, do you, Tom? He didn't smile. Doesn't matter what I believe. Just be careful. People who go digging too deep around here sometimes find more than they bargain for. With that, he turned and walked back toward the ranger station, leaving me standing there with a pit forming in my stomach. I told myself it was just local superstition, the kind of thing park rangers said to spook tourists. But as I turned my eyes back to the tower, the weight of his words lingered. By midday, I was deep into my hike, circling the base of the tower, taking notes on the surrounding landscape. The towering rock formation loomed overhead, casting long shadows over the forest below. I felt dwarfed by it, like a child standing at the feet of a giant. That's when I noticed the eyes. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a glimmer of sunlight catching on something in the trees. But then I saw them again, faint, glowing orbs between the branches. They were high up, too high to be an animal, and they followed my every movement. I stopped walking, my heart pounding. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered there, watching. I wanted to dismiss them as some kind of wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them, something intelligent. Forcing myself to continue, I kept walking, occasionally glancing over my shoulder to see if the eyes were still there. They were always just far enough away to keep me wondering, but close enough that I could feel their presence. When I finally made it back to camp, the unease hadn't left me. I sat by the RV trying to write in my notebook, but my mind kept drifting back to the eyes and the trees, the way they'd followed me, never straying too far but never coming closer either. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the campground in shadow. The tower loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the purple sky. The fire I'd started crackled weakly, the flames flickering as if they too were uncertain about staying here. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I was a rational man after all, a professor, a skeptic. But as the night wore on, that skepticism started to feel more like denial. The wind rustled through the trees and the fire flickered low. Then, just as the last light of the day faded, I heard it. A whistle. It started softly, almost like the wind, but it was too distinct, too deliberate, a single drawn-out note that drifted through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood, scanning the darkness. The fire cast faint light around the camp. "Hello," I called, though I wasn't sure what I expected to hear in return. The whistle came again, sharper this time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam into the trees, but there was nothing. No movement. Just the oppressive stillness of the forest. The whistling stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat back down, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the trees, made me bolt upright, expecting to see those glowing eyes or hear that eerie whistle again. I told myself it was just my imagination, just nerves from being out here alone. But the uneasy feeling stuck with me, settling deep in my bones. The next day I set out again, hoping to shake the paranoia that had settled over me. I hadn't gone far when I ran into Julie, a solo traveler I'd briefly noticed the day before. She was standing at the edge of the trail, staring up at Anthony, a strange look on her face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said as I approached, though her tone didn't match her words. There was something off about the way she spoke, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Yeah," I replied. "I've been hiking around, looking into the old legends. You know about the Watcher?" She turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "The Watcher? You're looking for it?" I nodded, uneasy. "It's just research." Julie's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Watcher doesn't like to be found. You know, it watches, but it doesn't want to be seen." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about her was wrong. She seemed too calm, too knowing. The way she stared at me made my skin crawl. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked back toward her campsite, leaving me standing there, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. That night, the whistling returned, louder this time, persistent. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight, my eyes darting between the trees. The whistle circled the campsite, moving closer then further away, as if it were testing me, toying with me. Then, just beyond the flickering light of the fire, I saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the edge of the woods. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, and his mouth was pursed as the tuneless whistle drifted from his lips. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure didn't answer. He just stood there, whistling that same eerie note. My chest tightened with a sudden surge of panic. I stumbled back toward the RV, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. When I looked up, he was gone. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me. The sound of my breath was too loud in the confined space. The next morning, I found footprints around the campsite. Small indentations in the dirt, leading in circles around the fire. They hadn't been there before. On the final night, I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams of Anthony had become unbearable. Nightmares of the stone pulsing, breathing like a living thing. I dreamt of eyes, hundreds of them, watching me from the shadows, always watching. I had to go to the tower. I had to see it up close. I grabbed my gear and set out under the cover of darkness, the whistle guiding me, pulling me toward the monolith. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The stars above twisted and shifted, unfamiliar constellations blinking in and out of existence. As I neared the base of the tower, I saw her again, Julie, standing at the foot of the rock, her face pale and her smile too wide. "The Watcher is waiting," she whispered. "It's always been waiting." The whistle grew louder, piercing through my thoughts, driving me forward. I reached the tower, my hands trembling as I touched the cold stone, and then out of the shadows, the Watcher appeared. It was a massive shadowy figure, its body indistinguishable from the darkness, but its eyes, glowing, burning orbs that stared into me, through me. It didn't speak with words, but its presence filled my mind, offering me ancient knowledge, secrets of the tower, of the universe, of myself. But the price, I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The more I listened, the more I realized that accepting its offer would mean losing everything. My mind, my soul, everything that made me, me. I stumbled back, tearing myself away from the Watcher's gaze. The whistle reached a fever pitch and I ran. The ground beneath me shifted and warped as the world collapsed around me. I barely made it back to the RV. When I crossed the threshold, the whistling stopped. The forest fell silent. I drove away as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The image of the Watcher's eyes burned into my mind. I knew I would never be the same. I've never been a superstitious man. Ghosts, spirits, curses, all of it felt like nonsense. My wife, Sarah, was the opposite. She loved all that mystical, spiritual stuff. She'd go on and on about how some places had energies or how she could feel something otherworldly when we'd visit a new place. I used to tease her for it. I didn't mean anything by it, I just never took it seriously. Now I wish I had. It's been almost a year since Sarah died. I still don't know how to talk about it. I don't talk about it, really. I just packed up the RV one day and decided to drive to get away from everything. Her voice, her smile, the way she used to look at me when I'd roll my eyes at her hippie nonsense. It was all too much to deal with, so I left. I wasn't running from her memory exactly. More like I was trying to outrun the guilt that came with it. Sarah always wanted to visit the desert, especially the Navajo Nation. She said Monument Valley was one of the most spiritual places in the world. I never took her. Work got in the way, or my cynicism did. Either way, it never happened. And now, with nothing but miles of empty road ahead of me, I found myself driving right into that part of the world. Maybe it was my way of making up for it. The landscape around me was beautiful in an eerie, desolate way. Massive red rocks rising out of the desert, mesas silhouetted against the setting sun. The kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant. I parked the RV in a remote spot off an unmarked dirt road. No other campers around, just the endless stretch of desert and the towering rock formations in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful even. I thought maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I stepped out and walked a bit around the RV, taking in the silence. The air was cool, the sky already darkening with the stars beginning to shimmer into view. Sarah would have loved it. As I sat by the small campfire I'd built, poking at the flames, I thought I heard something in the distance. A howl, maybe? Coyotes. I figured it was nothing unusual in a place like this, but the sound was strange, more like a scream than an animal call. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. Still, it gnawed at me. Something about the isolation felt different tonight, heavier. I tried to shake the feeling and headed back into the RV. I locked the door out of habit, but deep down I knew a lock wouldn't help me feel safe. Not tonight. The first sign that something was wrong came early the next morning. I had been outside, sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the desert, when I noticed the tracks. They were big, too big to belong to a coyote. Canine-like, sure, but the prints were deeper, more defined, and there were too many of them. They circled the RV in a wide arc. I crouched down to get a closer look. The spacing was off, as if whatever had made them had a stride far longer than any normal animal. I shook my head. Probably a wolf, I reasoned, even though they weren't supposed to roam this part of the desert. Or maybe a large dog from a nearby ranch. Either way, I wasn't about to get spooked over some tracks. I spent the day hiking, taking in the massive rock formations and the endless red sands. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, but I ignored them. I refused to let my mind play tricks on me. This was supposed to be my reset, my chance to process everything and finally move on. But that night, as the firelight flickered in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The coyotes started up again. At least I assumed they were coyotes. But the howls were different this time. Longer, more drawn out, closer. I told myself it was nothing, tried to focus on the crackling fire, but the unease crept in anyway. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the ridge not far from the RV. A figure, tall, humanoid, but somehow wrong. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like it didn't quite know how to walk. I blinked and it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. My heart pounded. I stood, trying to peer into the darkness, but there was nothing out there. Just empty desert. The howls stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I quickly doused the fire and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, a grown man terrified by shadows in the night. I was just exhausted. That was all. Grief and exhaustion made you see things that weren't there. I repeated that to myself as I crawled into bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next morning, I found more tracks. This time, they weren't just around the RV. They led right up to the windows, pressed deep into the sand, circling the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. I stared at them, unease twisting in my stomach. These prints were bigger than the ones from yesterday, deeper too. Something was out here. Something that was getting bolder. I decided to leave. That morning, I packed up my things, double-checked the tires on the RV, and set the GPS for the nearest town. But as soon as I turned the ignition, the engine sputtered. It wouldn't start. "Come on, not now," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I stepped outside to check the engine, hoping it was something simple. But when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. There was no reason for the RV to stall like this. Yet, there I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no cell signal and no way to leave. As the day wore on, that strange feeling of being watched never left me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd catch sight of that figure again, but the desert remained eerily quiet. That night it came closer. I heard it long before I saw it, footsteps outside the RV. Soft at first, then heavier, more deliberate. Something was walking around, pacing as if deciding what to do next. I stayed perfectly still, listening as the footsteps circled the RV, stopping near the windows. Then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was just a branch scraping against the side of the RV, But the sound was too methodical. It came in short bursts, like claws dragging across metal, testing the strength of the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the window, slowly pulling back the curtain just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. There, outside in the dark, was the figure I had seen on the ridge. But it was clearer now, standing in the moonlight, just feet from the RV. It wasn't human. At least, not anymore. It looked like a man, but its limbs were wrong. Too long, too thin. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its face, it was shifting, contorting, flickering between the face of a man and that of a coyote. The scratching stopped. It turned toward the window, as if it could sense me watching. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, locked onto mine. Time seemed to freeze. Then it bared its teeth in a sickening grin. I staggered back, heart hammering in my chest, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out. I had to run. But as soon as my hand reached for the latch, I heard it. "Gary," I froze. "Gary, it's me." The voice, Sarah's voice, soft, familiar, filled with the love I hadn't heard in almost a year. I turned slowly, staring at the window. The figure outside had disappeared, but the voice lingered, echoing in the night. "Gary, come outside, please." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Sarah was gone. She was gone. But the voice, it sounded so real. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Gary, come to me." I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the scratching returned. More violent this time, as if the creature was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't open the door. I didn't go outside. The next morning, everything was quiet. No scratches, no footsteps, no voice. I stepped outside, and the desert was calm again. The tracks had been erased by the wind. The RV started without a hitch. I drove away from Monument Valley, leaving the cursed land behind. But the memory of that night, the voice of my wife, the creature in the dark, has followed me ever since. Some things can't be explained. Some things, I realize now, should never be disturbed. "7 months in the Nasaka. 7 months. 7 whole months without touching a drop. I should have been proud, right? But sitting alone in this RV, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, I didn't feel proud. I felt restless, empty. The kind of empty that creeps up on you, settling in your bones when there's nothing but the sound of your own thoughts bouncing around your skull. This trip was supposed to be a celebration, a gift to myself for staying clean. I thought the solitude would help me clear my head, maybe give me some perspective. The Nasaka had always been a place of peace for me. My dad used to take me camping here when I was a kid, back when life was simple, before the bottle got its hooks into me. I pulled out my phone, flicking through pictures of those old trips. My thumb hesitated over the last photo of my dad and me standing by a roaring campfire. That was before everything went to hell, before drinking became my escape from everything I couldn't face. The phone buzzed, pulling me back to the present. It was my brother Jerry, checking in as usual. "Hey man," he said when I answered. "How's the trip? You hanging in there?" Jerry was always the responsible one, clean-cut, married with kids, a steady job. He'd been my lifeline after the wreckage of my addiction. I owed him more than I could ever repay. "Yeah, it's good," I lied. "Just me and the trees. Peaceful." "You staying out of trouble?" I chuckled. "I'm not exactly near any temptations out here," I said. I didn't tell him about the bottle I'd brought with me. It sat in the back of the RV, unopened but still there, just in case. A cruel comfort. I'd stared at it more than once already, the amber liquid calling to me in the quiet. "Good to hear," Jerry said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. "Just keep your head straight, all right? I know it's tough being out there alone, but you got this. Call me if you need anything." "I will, thanks." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows through the trees. The sky faded from a soft orange to deep purple, and with it the familiar sense of isolation began to settle in. The first night in the Nasaka should have been serene, but as soon as the darkness took over I felt it, the unease. The forest around me was too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the faint crackle of my campfire outside. I sat at the picnic table near the fire, trying to relax, but the silence only seemed to grow heavier. I poked at the flames with a stick, hoping they'd somehow keep the stillness at bay. Then I heard it, a whistle. Faint at first, like a breeze cutting through the trees, but unmistakably human. I froze, listening. It was tuneless, just a single drawn-out note that seemed to float through the air. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing. No movement. No one else was supposed to be this far out. I had parked in a secluded area of the park, away from the main trails. The whistling continued, soft but constant. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, but even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded deliberate. I stood, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, and slowly circled the fire. I kept the flames between me and the trees, my eyes darting between the dark shapes of the pines. The whistle came again, louder this time, closer. My heart hammered in my chest, the familiar anxiety clawing its way up my throat. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking the thick silence. No response, just another long, drawn-out whistle. I grabbed my flashlight from the RV and swept the beam through the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but all I saw were shadows. No footsteps, no crunch of leaves, just that damn whistling drifting through the trees like a ghost. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing, right? Just a trick of the wind. The mountains could be strange like that, especially at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The bottle of whiskey in the back of the RV started to look more and more appealing, but I shoved that thought down. I wasn't here for that, not this time. To clear my head, I went for a hike, following a trail that wound through the dense forest. The air was crisp, the scent of pine and damp earth filling my lungs. For a while, it worked. I could almost forget about the night before. Almost. That's when I saw the first marking. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a rough, jagged symbol that looked like a spiral or maybe an eye. I couldn't tell. It didn't look natural. It felt intentional, like a warning. I ran my fingers over it, the grooves deep and uneven. I kept walking, but the farther I went, the more symbols I saw. Spirals, faces, strange runes etched into the trees, all leading deeper into the woods. It felt like they were guiding me somewhere, though I wasn't sure I wanted to find out where. That night, the whistling returned. I was sitting by the fire again, trying to keep my mind off the bottle when the sound drifted through the trees. This time it wasn't soft. It was louder, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and scanned the forest. My heart pounded in my ears. My mouth went dry. The whistling seemed to circle the campsite, moving slowly but deliberately. It was all I could hear, filling the silence like a haunting lullaby. I turned, and that's when I saw him, standing just beyond the tree line. A man, gaunt and pale, his hollow eyes fixed on me. He stood motionless, his lips pursed as he whistled that same eerie, tuneless note. "Hey!" I called, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. He just stood there watching me. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, cutting through the night air like a knife. I took a step toward him, but as soon as I moved, he turned and disappeared into the trees. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, something deeper. I felt the urge to chase him, to follow that haunting sound, but my legs refused to move. I stayed by the fire until dawn, too scared to go back inside the RV. The next day, I tried to leave. I packed up my gear, grabbed the keys to the RV, and decided I'd had enough of the Nasaka. But when I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over, just a dull click. I swore under my breath, popped the hood and checked the battery. Everything looked fine, but the damn thing wouldn't start. I tried calling Jerry, but my phone was dead. I'd charged it the night before, but now it was completely drained. No signal, no service, nothing. The forest around me felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just beyond the trees. The whistling started again, faint at first, then growing louder, like a taunting melody. I grabbed the bottle from the back of the RV. I wasn't going to drink it, not yet. But holding it made me feel better, more in control, as if I could use it as a weapon somehow. That night, the stranger came back. I woke up to the sound of whistling, loud, sharp, right outside the RV. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked out the window. He was standing by the fire pit, his pale face illuminated by the flames. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, and that awful whistling filled the air, pressing in on me from all sides. He took a step toward the RV, and I felt the panic rise in my chest. I grabbed the bottle, holding it like a club, and stumbled outside. The air was freezing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whistling pierced through my skull, making it hard to think. I raised the bottle, ready to throw it, but then something stopped me. For the first time in days, I heard something else, a voice, faint but real. Jerry's voice. "Nick, don't do it." I blinked, shaking my head. The stranger was gone. The whistling had stopped, and there, in the silence, I realized what I had been about to do. The bottle slipped from my hands and shattered on the ground. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The whistling was gone, but the fear, the isolation, it wasn't something I could run from. Not out here, not anywhere. When the sun rose, I tried the RV again. This time it started. I drove out of the Nasaka that morning, not looking back. The whistling stayed behind, lost in the trees, but the memory of it, the temptation, would stay with me. 7 months sober. But this trip taught me something I hadn't been ready to face. Some demons don't live in bottles. They live in the silence, in the spaces we create for ourselves when we're trying to hide from the world. I thought the desert would heal me. Red Rock Canyon was supposed to be a place to clear my head, to sit in silence and let the vast empty land take away the chaos of the last few months. I'd lost everything, my wife, my job, and I needed something, anything, to remind me that there was still some peace left in the world. Instead, it felt like I'd driven into a nightmare. I parked the RV at the far end of the campground, as far away from the few other campers as I could get. I wanted solitude, to think, or maybe to stop thinking. I wasn't sure. The sun was setting as I stepped out, casting a deep orange glow across the red sandstone cliffs. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made you feel small, like the world was too big for you to matter. Maybe that's what I needed. I'd been driving for hours with only the occasional crackle of the radio for company. The RV was old, creaking and groaning as I navigated the winding roads into the canyon. It had seen better days, much like me. As I stretched, a low rumble came from under the hood. "Great," I muttered, giving the RV a half-hearted kick. The engine had been acting up for days, but I figured I could deal with it later. I wasn't here for that. I was here to get away, to let the emptiness of the desert swallow me whole. That night, after I'd settled in, I sat outside the RV, staring up at the stars. Out here, away from the city, the sky was incredible, clear, endless. But as the stars twinkled overhead, I noticed something strange. At first, I thought they were planes, blinking in and out far above the canyon. But then they moved too fast, too erratically. I leaned forward, squinting. There were 3 of them, glowing faintly blue, darting through the sky in impossible patterns. They weren't planes. I wasn't sure what they were. I stood up, straining my neck to follow their path as they circled overhead. They blinked off one by one. And the desert was silent again. Just stars, I told myself, even though I knew it wasn't true. The next morning, I woke up to find the RV's battery nearly dead. My phone, which I had left charging overnight, hadn't gained a single bar. I tried turning the engine over, but all I got was a dull click. My chest tightened. Being stranded in the middle of the desert wasn't part of the plan. I had enough food and water for a few days, sure, but the isolation was starting to feel less like a retreat and more like a trap. Chupi's RV was parked a few spots down, his beat-up vehicle sitting in the shade of a large rock formation. He waved me over as I stepped out of mine, a wide grin on his sunburnt face. "Morning," he called. "Beautiful day, huh?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, sure. Hey, you wouldn't happen to have jumper cables, would you? Choopy scratched his scruffy chin, then shook his head. Sorry, friend, but I can give you a ride into town later if you need help. It's not too far. I thanked him, but something about Choopy unsettled me. Maybe it was how relaxed he seemed, like this place wasn't bothering him at all. As I stood there, he tilted his head toward the canyon walls. You see the lights last night? He asked. I froze. Yeah, what were they? He shrugged, like it was nothing. Oh, those things. People talk about them all the time. Could be military, could be something else. No one really knows, but they've been around as long as I've been camping out here. I laughed nervously. Something else, huh? Choopy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. People say they're not from this world. I don't know about that, but sometimes they follow you. Just don't go too far out at night, and you'll be fine. I forced another laugh, but my stomach churned. Choopy's tone was too casual, too accepting. I thanked him again and went back to my RV, trying to shake off the feeling that I was missing something important. The day dragged on, the heat baking the ground beneath my feet. I spent the afternoon hiking a short trail near the campground, trying to clear my head, but the vast emptiness only made me feel more alone. I kept thinking about the lights, how they'd moved, how they seemed to watch me. That night, they returned. I was sitting outside again, nursing a warm beer and staring at the sky when I saw them. 3 faint blue lights hovering over the canyon. This time, they were closer. Too close. They flickered almost playfully, darting back and forth like they were searching for something. I stood up, my heart pounding. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this place made sense. I backed toward the RV, never taking my eyes off the lights, but as I reached for the door, the lights blinked out. Gone, just like that. A cold breeze swept through the canyon, and I shivered. It was too quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing, just the dead, suffocating silence of the desert. Then the RV lights flickered once, twice, and went dark. My chest tightened as I stumbled into the RV, fumbling for the flashlight. I clicked it on, but the beam was weak, barely cutting through the darkness. The electrical panel was dead, and my phone wouldn't turn on. Every piece of technology I had was failing, and I had no idea why. A sudden knock on the door made me jump. Chris, you okay? It was Savio, the hiker I'd met earlier that day. She'd pitched her tent nearby, planning to stay for a few nights before heading out. I opened the door, trying to hide my panic. Yeah, just some electrical issues, I said, forcing a smile. Everything's dead. I'm guessing the battery's shot. Savio frowned, glancing back at her tent. That's weird. My phone's dead too, and my flashlight keeps flickering. Her voice was calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She felt it too, the strangeness in the air, the weight of the silence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you think it's the lights? Choopy told me about them earlier, said people disappear sometimes. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. Disappear? Savio nodded, her gaze drifting toward the canyon. Yeah, it's mostly stories, but you seemed pretty convinced. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, like the desert was closing in on us. I wasn't sure if I believed in Choopy's campfire tales, but the lights, they were real, and they weren't natural. We should get out of here, Savio said, breaking the silence. I don't like this. I can't, I replied. My RV won't start. She hesitated, then nodded. Mine either. I tried earlier, but it's completely dead. We stood there, staring at each other, the weight of the situation sinking in. Something was wrong with this place. The lights weren't just an oddity. They were doing something, affecting everything around us, and we were stuck miles from any help. We'll wait until morning, I said, trying to sound confident. Maybe it's just a temporary glitch. We'll figure it out. Savio Emily didn't look convinced, but she nodded and headed back to her tent. I locked the RV door behind her, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. That night, I barely slept. The silence was oppressive, like a blanket wrapped too tight around me. Every creak of the RV, every gust of wind made my heart race. I kept waiting for the lights to come back, to hover outside my window, but they didn't. Instead, I woke up sometime in the early hours, drenched in sweat, my head pounding. I sat up, blinking in the darkness. Something was wrong. I glanced at my watch. It was 4 a.m., but that didn't make sense. I checked the time just moments ago and it had been midnight. Where had the hours gone? I stumbled outside, feeling disoriented. The air was cooler now, the desert's chill settling in. The stars were out, but there was no sign of the lights. My mind was foggy, like I'd been dreaming. But the dust on my boots told me I'd been walking, but where and why? Panic surged through me. I couldn't remember. Hours were missing, and I had no idea what had happened. The lights were playing with us, toying with our sense of reality. I ran toward Savio's tent, calling her name, but when I got there, she was gone. Her tent was empty, her pack still there, but she was nowhere to be found. "Savio!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. Nothing. The only sound was the wind. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the lights, the missing time, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. We weren't alone. I sprinted back to my RV, slamming the door behind me, and tried the engine again. To my shock, it roared to life. The headlights flickered on, and I didn't hesitate. I jammed the gear shift into drive and tore out of the campsite, gravel kicking up behind me as I sped down the winding canyon road. I glanced in the rearview mirror for just a second. I saw them, the blue lights hovering in the distance, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I hit the outskirts of Las Vegas. The neon lights of the city felt like a lifeline. But even then, as I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting, and I wasn't sure if I'd really escaped at all.